Hi students, today we're going to go over Unit 2, Module 3, Session 3 in the library. Number 1 says, the librarian at our school asked the 4th and 5th graders to vote on their favorite kind of book. The circle graphs below show the results. Use the information to answer the questions below. So here we have 4th grade favorites, 5th grade favorites, and our key, which lets us know the dark gray is fiction, the light gray is fantasy, and the white or lightish gray is nonfiction. A says, what fraction of the 4th graders said they liked nonfiction books best? And how do you know? And so there's a couple parts there to that question. So let's underline some important parts. It's asking what fraction of the 4th graders said they liked nonfiction books best? And how do you know? And so we're looking at the 4th graders. And we know that nonfiction is the white, and so it's not labeled right there. But I see it's half here and a quarter here. So what fraction is right here? Well, I know that 1/2, oh sorry, that was not very good. Let's try that again. I know that 1/2 plus 1/4 equals 3/4, and then I know 3/4 plus 1/4 equals 1/2. So that 1/4 is that missing part right here. And so what fraction of 4th graders said they liked nonfiction the best? 1/4 is the answer. B asks us, if there are 96 4th graders, how many like fantasy books best? Show your work. And so again, some key parts there. We have 96 4th graders, and we're looking at fantasy books. So coming up here, which color represents fantasy? That's a light gray, 1/4. And so there's 96 altogether. So what does this 1/4 represent? So what is it we're trying to solve? We're trying to solve 1/4 of 96. 1/4 of 96. And so a couple ways you can think of that. I know that half of 96 is, well, half of 90 is 45, 46, 47, 48. Is that correct? 48 plus 48 is 96. Yes, it is. So half of 96 is 48. And I know a quarter is half of a half. And so what's half of 48? That is 24. And so then I can show my work by saying, well, I know half of 48 equals 24. And so I just found a quarter of 96, which is 24. So 1/4 of 96 equals 24. Also, I can think 96 divided by 4, which is also 24. Is that right? Is 24 times 4 96? Yes, it is. And so how many 4th graders liked fantasy books? There's our answer, 24 4th graders. Continuing on to C, what fraction of the 5th graders said they liked fantasy books best? And so now we're moving on to 5th graders. So we just did 4th graders in fantasy books. Now we're doing 5th graders in fantasy books. And so coming up here to our circle graph. Fantasy again is a light gray, so this light gray right there. And so I need to know what does that wedge, what does that piece represent? And so similarly to A, I know that, well, I know that 1/2 minus 3/4 equals 1/4. And then I know 1/4 minus 1/8 equals a quarter minus an eighth equals 1/8. How do I know? Because also this quarter, this 1/4, I can also think of it as 2/8, and 2/8 minus 1/8 equals 1/8. And so that is this missing piece right here. This is 1/8. And so what fraction of fifth graders said they like fantasy books best? The answer is 1/8. And D, it says, if there are 112 fifth graders, how many like nonfiction books best? Show your work. So nonfiction is like the kind of whitish color, 1/8. So what is 1/8 of 112? Because I'm told there's 112 fifth graders. So I'm trying to solve 1/8 of 112. And so I'm thinking, well, similarly to what I did for B, I can take a half, and a half. I wonder if that also works like for double, 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 because I know double, double, double is 8. So a half would be 1/8. Just a thought there. So let's take 112, half of that, so divide by 2 is 56, because I know half of 100 is 50, and I know half of 12 is 6. So 112 divided by 2 is 56, so that's half of 112. Now we're dividing by 2 again to find a quarter. So 56 divided by 2, 25, 26, 27, 28. So now that's a quarter of 112. And now we're going to divide that by 2 one more time. So 28 divided by 2 is 14. So how many like nonfiction books best? 14 fifth graders is our answer. And we showed our work by dividing by 2 3 times to find 1/8. E says, what fraction of the fifth graders said they liked fiction books best? And how do you know? So again, our key parts here are fifth graders, fiction books. So looking up here, fiction is the dark gray, 3/4. So what is 3/4 of 112? That's what I'm trying to solve. 3/4 of 112. Well, I don't really need to do my work again, because I can just say I know 1/2 of 112 I already solved, which is 56 above. And I know a quarter of 112 equals, again, above 28. And I know 3/4 is 1/2 plus 1/4, or I can just take this times 3, because I'm trying to find 3/4. So I know 1/4. 3/4 would be 3 times this amount. So 28 times 3, or 56 plus 28, equals 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 5, 6, 7, 8. The answer would be 84 fifth graders. And how do you know? Kind of like you would write what we just talked about. I know a half and I know a quarter, and a half plus a quarter is 3/4. And that's how it's 84 fifth graders. And you know what I just realized? I realized that I did not read E very carefully, because it asked what fraction, not how many, right? Because right up here on B, it says how many like fantasy books, and here it's asking what fraction. And so what's the answer to what fraction? That's right, 3/4. And how do you know? Because it says it right here, 3/4 of fifth graders liked fiction. And it tells me, I know that color represents fiction. Okay, that's a lot easier than when I made it. But now we know that 3/4 of 112 is 84. Let's move on to the next page. Number 2 says, Madeline walked 1.5 miles to her Aunt Jenny's house yesterday morning. After visiting with Aunt Jenny, Madeline walked 3/4 of a mile to the park where her mother picked her up. How many miles in all did she walk yesterday? So let's take a look at some key parts here. She walked 1.5 miles to her Aunt Jenny's house. Then she walked 3/4 of a mile to the park where her mother picked her up. How many miles in all did she walk yesterday? Show all your work. So we're going to add 1.5 plus 3/4. So here we have 1.5 plus 3/4. And that's what we're going to solve. So I know a half is 2/4, And so I can change that half to 2/4 plus 3/4 or 3/4 equals 1 5/4. That's an improper fraction because the numerator is larger than the denominator, so I'm going to change that. And it's going to be 2 1/4 because I know that 4/4 is 1 whole. So I'm going to take 1 whole from that and add it to that 1 whole, which comes 2. How many fourths am I left with? 1/4. And so how many miles in all did you walk yesterday? The answer is 2 1/4 miles. And make sure I add the unit there, so I'm going to write miles. For 3, it says, Sarah and her mother bought some vegetables at the farmer's market yesterday. They bought 2 3/4 pounds of cabbage, 1/2 a pound of onions, and 1 3/8 pounds of carrots. How many pounds of vegetables did they buy in all? Show all your work. So let's go ahead and take out some key information here. I know they bought 2 3/4 pounds of cabbage, 1/2 pound of onions, and 1 3/8 pounds of carrots. And now it's asking me how many pounds of vegetables did they buy in all. So that key part in all means we're going to be adding. So what are we adding? We're taking 2 3/4 pounds plus 1/2 a pound plus 1 3/8 pound. And so what I do is maybe add the first 2 up first. And so we're going to just look first at these 2 parts. So we're taking 2 3/4 plus 1/2. Now I know 1/2 is the same as 2/4. There's 2/4 and 1/2. So 2 3/4 plus 2/4 equals 2 5/4. We don't even have to change that out of an improper fraction right now. We're going to go ahead and add now our piece that's up here. So we're going to add this now back in. And so we're going to say a plus 1 3/8. And now I'm going to change, am I going to change these fourths into eighths or the eighths into fourths? I can change eighths into fourths, but I know I would have to divide it in half. And 3 divided in half isn't pretty. So we're going to change the fourths into eighths. So 5/4 would be how many eighths? That's right, 10/8, because I'm going to take each fourth, I'm going to split it in half. And so that'd be a total of 8/4. Doubling it, splitting in half. Right, I can think of it as a picture here. If I had fourths, right, there are fourths here. How do I get eighths? Split in half. That's how I have eighths. Okay, so 5/4 is how many eighths? It would be 10/8. So now I have 2 10/8 plus 1 3/8. That equals 3 13/8. Now 13/8 is an improper fraction. I would accept this as a correct answer, but to make it proper, we're going to go ahead and say that that equals 4 5/8. So the answer is 4 5/8 pounds. Let's look at the challenge. It says Madison went to the mall with her big sister last weekend. Their mom dropped them off at 1 o'clock and said, I'll pick you up at 2:30. The girls spent 5/6 of an hour at the toy store, 2/3 of an hour at the pet store, and 1/2 of an hour at the food court. When they got back to the bench to meet their mom, she was already there. She said, where have you been? I've been waiting blank of an hour for you. How long had their mom been waiting for them? So here we're going to have to do is we're going to have to think, how long did they spend at all these stores? So I'm going to add up these amounts right here. So we have 5/6 of an hour. Oops, right in my highlighter. It's not going to work. Okay, they have 5/6 of an hour plus 2/3 of an hour plus 1/2 of an hour. Because I want to think, how long did they spend shopping? So 5/6 of an hour. I know 1/6 of an hour is 10 minutes. So 5/6 would be 50 minutes. 2/3, I know that 1/3 is 20 minutes. So 2/3 would be 40 minutes. And 1/2 of an hour is 30 minutes. So adding that up, 50 plus 40 plus 30. Well, 50 plus 40 is 90, plus 30 more is 120. So that's 120 minutes. And 120 minutes is the same as what fraction of an hour? That's right, the fraction of an hour would be 120/60ths. And that's the same as 2 hours. Now, the mom said that she would drop him off at 1 o'clock and pick him up at 2:30. So how long was the mom giving them? From 1 o'clock to 2:30 is how long? Yeah, that's an hour and 30 minutes. And they were shopping for 2 hours. So how long was the mom waiting? That's right. We're going to take 2 hours and we're going to subtract an hour and 30 minutes. So what's 2 hours minus an hour and 30 minutes? We're trying to find the difference between that. That's 1 hour. 2 hours minus an hour and 30 minutes equals 30 minutes. But here it's asking for a fraction because it says, where have you been? I've been waiting blank of an hour for you. Half of an hour, right? Because 30 minutes is half. And that's all for today's homework.